Today's Lunchbox Lecture speaker is Mr. Leo Adam Biga, who will be discussing the life and work of Nebraska filmmaker Joan Micklin Silver. Mr. Biga is a veteran freelance journalist and author from Omaha, Nebraska. He will be extending upon his recent article in the Nebraska History Magazine. It's the winter 2024 issue, which is one of several articles he's written for Nebraska History Magazine. Nebraska History Magazine is a quarterly illustrated magazine that explores Nebraska's history and culture through original articles and historical images from the Nebraska State Historical Society's extensive collections. You can find the recording of this program, previous programs, and even our podcast, Nebraska History Podcast, on YouTube at NE Historical. So please join me in thanking and welcoming Mr. Leo Adam Biga.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate it, and glad to have this opportunity to talk about film and a filmmaker. It's a particular interest of mine. So the subject of my talk today, the late filmmaker Joan Micklin Silver of Omaha, is not nearly the best-known native Nebraskan to achieve cinema success, but I would argue that her story and her work should be as celebrated as any of her fellow Nebraskans in film. Though she never came back to Nebraska to shoot any parts of her films, she held Omaha, the state, and her Midwest roots close to her heart. Her film production company was variously called Omaha Films and Midwest Films, and she once told me about her interest in returning to shoot a Western in the Sandhills. Her short films for public television, her feature films, and her made-for-TV movies were relatively small in number but mighty in impact. Her best work, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of people, stands the test of time. When you consider the obstacles that she and other women filmmakers faced, the fact that she gained a foothold in the industry at all, then persevered to have a long, fruitful career highlighted by films that endure and inspire, you must conclude her story and legacy deserve much more attention in her home state. I'm guessing that most of you here know little or nothing about her, or knew little or nothing about her before my Nebraska History Magazine and Flatwater Free Press stories, if you saw them. With a show of hands, how many knew the name Joan Micklin Silver, or know the name, and how many have seen any of her work? Yeah. This would be typical for any Nebraska audience, I guarantee you. And hopefully, if nothing else, my appearance here today will encourage you to seek out information about her and to seek out her films. And there is no shortage of information about her on the web, for starters. Let me share a personal reflection. I had the pleasure of interviewing Joan a number of times over a 2-decade period. She was very generous with her time. Full disclosure, I told a white lie to get her to agree to speak with me. I had just had my first story on Alexander Payne published in 1998 when I called her requesting an interview. It wasn't the first time I had tried getting her to give me an interview. Some years before, even predating my freelance career, I tried to interest her in coming to Omaha for a film festival featuring her work, but she politely declined in a lovely letter that I still have. She was about to turn me down again when I said I wanted to interview her as part of a series I was doing on Nebraskans in film, and that the piece I had done on Payne was the first in that series. In truth, there was no series, but mentioning his name worked wonders. She told me how much she admired his work, and she agreed on the spot to an interview. If I recall correctly, some years later I confessed to her that I had used Payne's name as a ploy to reel her in, and she was amused by my pluck. She was born in Omaha, 1935, died in Manhattan, New York, 2000, and 20. So she was, I think, 85 years old upon her passing. She was suffering from some dementia at the end of her life, and I would fairly regularly correspond with her via email, and there came a time when she wasn't responding, and then I subsequently found that she was battling dementia. Her parents were Russian Jewish immigrants. Her family found success with their own hardware store, Micklin Lumber, in north downtown Omaha. There's a picture of Micklin Lumber. I can remember going to Micklin Lumber, at least I think I remember, because sometimes you're not sure if you actually have a memory or it's been planted in there by something else. But I seem to remember going there with my father once or twice to purchase something. Growing up, Joan became enamored with stories of the old country and coming to America told to her by her father, uncles, and aunts. Their vivid tales sparked a love of storytelling and an appreciation for the immigrant experience that she would tap again and again in her movies. This is a quote from Joan. It's a long one, but it's a good one. So many families don't want to talk about the experience of immigration. It's traumatic. They want to become Americans as soon as possible, and they want to leave it all behind them. But my family was of the other variety that loved to tell the tales. I was always fascinated by all the stories they told, of the people that made it, the people that didn't, the people that went crazy, the people that went back. I remember sitting around the dinner table and hearing stories that were very funny and enjoyable and strong and interesting and serious. So I was attracted to those stories in the first place. My father was ill during my teenage years, and he was home a great deal. So I spent a lot of time with him. He was looking for somebody to talk to, and believe me, I was there, and I was really happy to talk to him. I've always thought immigrants fall into two experiences, those who don't want to talk about it at all, and those who want to talk about it all the time. And that was my father. He loved reminiscing about it. As a very bright, questioning man, he was also interested in the world, politics, current events, and books. I was so lucky to have talk after talk with such a wonderful father at a time when it was unusual for fathers to talk to their daughters. Joan became a cinephile early on, finding inspiration in films she saw at the Dundee Theater in Omaha. That was her neighborhood theater. It's celebrating its centennial this year as part of the Film Screams Art Cinema family. She often cited Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt as a major influence. And there's a lot of filmmakers who refer to that film as one that didn't necessarily, influence or inspire their own work directly, but it inspired them about the world of cinema and the possibilities of cinema and storytelling. Soon after graduating Omaha Central High School in 1952, she left to study at Sarah Lawrence College. An interesting footnote, a classmate of hers at Omaha Central was Donald E. Thorin, who went on to a remarkable career in film of his own. First as a camera loader, then camera operator, then director of photography or cinematographer, contributing to several major films and collaborating with such filmmakers as Michael Mann. Silver met and married real estate professional Raphael Silver, and the couple moved to Cleveland, Ohio. Her interest in telling film stories grew in the glow of various new waves of world cinema that lit up movie screens: Italian, French, Japanese, German, British, American. She soon discovered the steep barriers to entry for women in film, especially for those looking to write and direct Hollywood feature or made-for-TV movies. Her goal was to break through as a Hollywood feature writer-director. But the male-dominated paternalistic hierarchy in that industry made it next to impossible for women to be taken seriously, much less considered for writing, directing jobs. It was very much a closed shop. From the late 30s through the late 70s, I think only one woman, actress turned director Ida Lupino, helmed any studio films, feature films. In the silent era into the 30s, several women did direct. But as the movies became ever more popular and profitable, the men heading the studio system confined women to only a few roles in the movie-making apparatus: actors, script readers, continuity directors, costume designers, editors. Joan gained experience in the medium, writing educational and short films for public television in the 1960s and early 70s. Linda Gottlieb was the producer for some of these projects. Yeah. All the while, Joan was seeing and admiring the independent films of individuals such as John Cassavetes, who showed a way forward to make and get seen small personal films outside the Hollywood system. The work and traction of some underground filmmakers such as Andy Warhol and Jim McBride no doubt got her attention. She would have also noted the work of Shirley Clark, Barbara Loden, and Elaine May, who made tentative inroads for women being taken seriously again as filmmakers. But even by the mid-70s, women directors of features, movies of the week, episodic television could be counted more or less on one hand. Up to that point, even through the late 70s, opportunities for women filmmakers were confined to the educational, experimental, and underground sectors of the industry. Silver would help change that. So, ideas and treatments that she developed around the challenges faced by wives of prisoners of war and missing in action American servicemen in the Vietnam War got the attention of veteran Hollywood director Mark Robson, I'm not sure how the name is pronounced, but he directed movies that many of you would be familiar with from the so-called golden age of Hollywood. He optioned the material and ended up making the picture for Universal Studios. It was released in 1972 as Limbo. I only recently learned that the aforementioned Linda Gottlieb and Joan Micklin Silver collaborated on a novel, Limbo, about the same subject matter. But it is unclear to me whether the novel preceded the film or followed it. Gottlieb served as producer of the Robson-directed film Limbo, whose script Silver was engaged to write. It marked Silver's first Hollywood screen credit. But when she clashed with Robson over changes that he and another writer he brought onto the project made to the script, she was fired. Showing a measure of grace, that director, who knew she wanted to direct herself, gave her access to the set so that she could watch the shoot. That experience gave her valuable insights into the filmmaking process and emboldened her desire and confidence to direct her own material. Between Limbo and her breakthrough debut feature, Hester Street, she made more short films, some of them echoing the immigrant experience her elders shared with her growing up. The project that made her name and gave her the foundation for a filmmaking career, Hester Street, was and she wouldn't have said this, a feminist take on the Jewish immigrant enclave of New York's Lower East Side at the turn of the last century. For her script, she drew on the novella Yuckel, A Tale of the New York Ghetto, and the family stories that she grew up listening to. This is a quote from Joan. "The immigrant experience was a very big part of my family's experience." She changed the focus of the novella from the husband to the wife, and that made all the difference. If you were to start with your first Joan Micklin Silver experience, start with Hester Street by all means. It's a beautiful little film that stands up beautifully today. She wrote the script with the intention of directing it herself. No studios showed interest, declaring the story as too ethnic and too rooted in the past, and balking at the idea of handing over the directing reins to her. This is a quote from Joan. "I couldn't get a job directing at all. At that time, the only job I was suitable for in the industry was writing." And she talked about how an executive in Hollywood actually said to her, "Feature films are expensive to make and expensive to market, and women directors are one more problem we don't need." So it was that blatant. I think she told me that in 1999. So that resistance prompted her and her husband to raise the approximately $400,000 needed to make the picture. With her directing and him producing, they achieved a low-budget gem of a period piece about a young emigre woman's eventual emancipation from her misogynistic and philandering husband. The qualities that distinguished it, small, carefully observed human moments in relationships that are equally dramatic and funny, would become her MO as a cinema storyteller. She told me she couldn't help but wonder while filming whether she'd ever get the chance to make another movie. And she said, I say that because things were pretty dire for women directors, and I really wanted to make one that would count for my family. When the Silvers shot the movie around Hollywood looking for a distribution deal, they met the same resistance as before. The suits once again complained that it was too ethnic, too tied to the past, and further objected to it being in black and white, the supposed surefire kiss of death at the box office. They certainly didn't trust a movie by a first-time director whose gender they viewed as a detriment to have any chance of reaching a wide audience. With no takers, the couple believed enough in their film that they took matters into their own hands and distributed themselves. And there's a whole story to be told just about that experience. I think I referenced in the Nebraska History Magazine story that Raphael Silver, Joan's husband, reached out to John Cassavetes himself for advice, like, how do you go about doing this? And he was nice enough to cooperate and advise. And I think even some of the people who helped distribute and market Cassavetes' films ended up working for the Silvers on behalf of Hester Street. That is obviously a still from Hester Street. And that is Joan and her husband Ray, or Raphael. What happened next represents one of the great American independent film success stories of that or any era. Through bookings at art houses, college campuses, and the like, the film found its audience, earning more than $5 million at the box office. Now remember, this is $1975, so that would be maybe $50 million or more today. So making it a bona fide indie hit, especially given its small production budget, and it happening outside the mainstream distribution system. The film's star, a then largely unknown Carol Kane, earned a surprise Academy Award nomination as Best Actress. So, when something like the film that won Best Picture at the most recent Oscars just a few weeks ago, help me with the title. Someone, Anora, does what it does, all right? A very small budget film that, more than earns back its money and gets the attention of the industry. It's certainly not the first time that has happened. So Joan Micklin Silver had a similar success with Hester Street. Now, it didn't get any more Academy Award nominations except for the one that its lead actress, Carol Kane, got. But if you see the film, it wouldn't be hard for you to imagine that, or you wouldn't disagree with the notion that it certainly could have been nominated or considered for other Oscars, especially for cinematography and design and certainly her script, which is just wonderful. What I really want to impress upon you is that when Silver had this unexpected success with Hester Street, she was among that handful of women directors making features. Her success with that film and the next few she did helped open doors for other women as writers and directors. And their ranks steadily grew in the 1980s and into the 90s. The pioneering efforts and achievements of Joan Micklin Silver played a part in making it possible for filmmakers like Susan Seidelman, Martha Coolidge, Catherine Bigelow, Penny Marshall, Barbra Streisand, Betty Thomas, Mira Nair, Cassie Lemons, Nora Ephron, Julie Taymor, Ava DuVernay, all the way up to Greta Gerwig, Chloe Zhao, to emerge and to, fulfill their dreams. Although Silver's work was not exclusively Jewish-themed, she often explored her heritage professionally. She directed the National Public Radio series Great Jewish Stories from Eastern Europe and Beyond. In 1995, the National Foundation for Jewish Culture honored Silver with a Jewish Cultural Achievement Award in the Media Arts category, which she accepted in memory of her parents. Her fellow honorees included Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Arthur Miller. Referring to Silver's work, the Foundation's executive director, Richard Siegel, said, "In Hester Street and Crossing Delancey," another of Joan's movies that I'll get to momentarily, in particular, she does something that very few other filmmakers have done, which is to look at the American Jewish experience in some depth and with considerable insight, from the inside, as it were. In her acceptance speech, the filmmaker explained how someone from such a goy hometown as Omaha could become so addicted to Jewish stories and characters. She referred, of course, to the stories her family told, dotted with a pungent Yiddish and much laughter at the human comedy of all. Such were my introductions to the magnificent and terrifying history of the Jews. When I began making movies, I was inevitably drawn to stories which had so much emotional weight for me as I grew up, she said. She added, "Making movies about the Jewish experience is a dangerous prospect. Every other Jew has an opinion. You can never satisfy everyone. I learned this after an early screening of Hester Street." In the 1997 Showtime movie, In the Presence of Mine Enemies, she directed a Rod Serling script originally produced live on Playhouse 90. Her film of the script starred Armin Mueller-Stahl as a rabbi trying to hold his community and family together in the Warsaw Ghetto of World War II. Mine Enemies marked the first time she dealt overtly with the Holocaust in her work. Her final feature, A Fish in the Bathtub, starring the real-life husband and wife comedy team of Jerry Stiller and Ann Mara, complemented Silver's unofficial trilogy of Jewish-American-themed stories that began with Hester Street and continued with Crossing Delancey. Have any of you ever seen Crossing Delancey? So you have seen a Joan Micklin Silver movie, and you didn't know it. There you go. There you go. Yeah, it's a pretty popular, well-known rom-com. It's an artful romantic comedy. It's certainly, it's maybe not for everyone, but I take it that you're a fan of it.
I remember liking.
Okay, I urge you to see it again because believe me, it stands the test of time. It's much better, in my opinion, than the average comedy film or relationship comedy film that you see released today. So Joan returned to her, and there's a still from Joan working with the stars of Crossing Delancey, Peter Riegert and Amy Irving. Okay. Joan returned to her interest in immigrant tales with a documentary project, The Bagel, an Immigrant Story, which she embarked on with food writer Matthew Goodman, author of Jewish Food, The World at Table. In their research, the pair found the bagel has strong reverberations with the greater immigrant story in America and the assimilation and discrimination that's part of it. This is Joan speaking. It came from Poland. It struggled and strained and went through everything most other immigrants do before it prospered. The documentary was unfinished at the time of her death in 2020, though all principal photography was completed. Her grandchild, Jack, who grew up watching movies with Joan and Ray, has the wealth of footage left by Joan, and he's seeking funding to complete the film in her honor. That's the last word I had on that. So something may have changed since I checked on that. So if nothing else should convince you to seek out Hester Street, which is easily accessible, in 2011, Hester Street was selected for inclusion in the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The citation notes the film has been praised for its accuracy of detail and sensitivity to the challenges immigrants faced during their acculturation process. The honor took Joan by surprise. I'm quoting her, "I was really pleased. I had no expectation, and I was delighted to be on the same list with a John Ford movie, The Iron Horse, and a Charlie Chaplin movie, The Kid." Not bad company, right? It's pretty exciting, she said. On getting news of its induction, Hester Street star Carol Kane said, It's a wonderful feeling to feel like something we did was authentic enough and true enough to be valued as something which should be preserved. You know, that's an extraordinary thing because so many movies are made every year and a lot of them just disappear. Though with Hester Street, Silver had clearly proven her chops as a bankable feature writer-director, new opportunities did not necessarily come flooding in. Over the next 2.5 decades, she would further establish herself a reliable filmmaker by working both inside and outside the Hollywood mainstream. Her two features after Hester Street were both critically well received, but did little business: Between the Lines and Chilly Scenes of Winter. She ran into studio interference on the latter, including a title change that she disliked. The studio called it Head Over Heels. Eventually, it got changed back to her preferred title, Chilly Scenes of Winter. I recommend both of those films. They both stand the test of time. And something that I have noted in some of the writing I've done about Joan, and I might even have a reference to it later in this presentation, is that, you know, and I told her this myself when I first got to interview her, her work reminds me of the best cinema comedy work that I've ever been exposed to. It's in the league of Ernst Lubitsch, Billy Wilder. Who else? A few other names come to mind. Preston Sturgis, and of course Nebraska's own Alexander Payne. So I rate her work right up there with these legendary names. Her instincts for finding emerging new on-screen talent continued with the two projects that followed Hester Street. Between the Lines is a dramedy about the personal and professional entanglements around an alternative newspaper in Boston. And it featured, among others, the very young John Hurd, who would star in Chilly Scenes, Lindsay Krause, Mary Lou Henner, Bruno Kirby, Joe Morton, Stephen Collins, and Jill Eikenberry. And then the existential rom-com Chilly Scenes, which tonally is, again, very much like Payne's work, in my opinion, co-starred Peter Riegert, who played opposite Amy Irving in that later film, Crossing Delancey. In Crossing Delancey, Silver found a perfect complement to Hester Street. The setting is once again the Lower East Side, only a century removed from the earlier film's timeline. It is a funny, sad, ironic tale of two Jewish people looking for love. Sam owns and operates the pickle stand his father started and remains close to the working-class immigrant experience and neighborhood. Isabel is a social climber and careerist who works in a posh uptown bookstore and tries distancing herself from her elder's own immigrant hand-to-mouth legacy. While Sam is smitten with Isabel, she resists him because he's not part of the cultural elite, even though there is an undeniable chemistry between the two. Despite her best efforts to sabotage things, in the end, she realizes what she thought she wanted wasn't for her after all, and steady, practical, also romantic Sam is. Susan Sandler wrote the incisive script, an adaptation of her own play of the same name. Hester Street and Crossing Delancey are perfect bookends to each other, and it would be a great double feature. And as a former film programmer, that's like my dream double feature to program somewhere, sometime. And hopefully that will happen. So those are the two Joan Micklin Silver films I heartily recommend that you begin with. Hester Street, her debut feature, and then the echo to that film, Crossing Delancey. And then if you like what you've seen up to that point, continue with her other films, some of which are relatively easy to find and access, and others maybe not so much. So this is a quote from an Omaha native. He's a filmmaker who's had a very interesting career of his own, Dan Mervish. And this is him commenting on Joan Micklin Silver. She was an unapologetically Jewish filmmaker making films informed by her own cultural experiences. The irony is that most people probably thought she was from New York, but sometimes it takes an Omahan to fully appreciate and comment on New York life. So I meant to mention earlier, so she and Raphael, they were in Cleveland, Ohio, but they did end up in New York, and that's where they spent the remainder of their lives. And so for the real formation of her career, she was based out of New York. And, you know, when you think of so-called New York filmmakers, you think of Woody Allen, you think of Sidney Lumet, you think of... She's also one of the great New York filmmakers of all time. She captured the city in her films. So if you love and know New York, you'll see it in her films, reflected in different ways. So Silver continued making films after crossing Delancey. Eventually, she and her work faded from public consciousness, though. She became largely unknown to a new generation of film students and filmmakers. A close friend of hers and Ray's, Ira Deutschman, who's a producer, he's a film producer, he's a film educator. He kind of has his hand in a lot of different spheres of movies. He co-produced a new play with music adapted directly from Hester Street. And it goes by Hester Street. And he knew Joan going all the way back to the marketing and distribution of Hester Street. He was just a young college-age kid at the time. So he had this 45-year relationship with Joan, and he was very fond of her and of her work. And at a certain point, he was teaching one of his film classes back east, and it occurred to him that none of his students knew Joan Micklin Silver's work at all. And that made him very sad, and so he kind of made it his mission to get her work known and seen again. And he said it was so bad that at this time, all of the rights of her films were either expired or about to expire with various distributors. And so what he did was he set about making sure that at least her best-known films, like Hester Street, like Crossing Delancey, etc., got restored. And this has happened, and they have been re-released, and they have been screening all over America. And but not in Nebraska. So, but we'll get to that in a moment. So the play with music, Hester Street, that Ira Deutschman was a co-producer of, made its world premiere last year in Washington, D.C., and its creators and producers hope for a Broadway production someday. That project really is helping also revive interest in the movie Hester Street and in Silver's, kind of body of work. As Ira told me, it's all about bringing Joan back to the surface again. And this is something that he can speak to directly. When I was trying to make the point earlier about, Joan being this pioneering figure whose success helped open doors for other women and helped also spark more of the American independent film movement. So Ira was there while it happened. Again, he was helping market and distribute Hester Street when it was originally released in 1975. He said Hester Street sparked a mini boom of female-directed independent films. It was inspirational as a kind of landmark independent success, but also it was about the fact that Joan was a female director. There was no other story like that, at least within those couple of decades. He's referring to they say, from the end of the 60s through the end of the 70s, about a woman being able to make the movie she wanted to make. There's no doubt the success of that film got others interested in the fact there was this unmined talent out there that could be taken advantage of. Now, some could argue that Elaine May did make the film that she wanted to make in A New Leaf. I don't know if you're familiar with that. The very good comedy starring Elaine alongside Walter Matthau. And Barbara Loden, who I mentioned earlier, she, I think, made the film she wanted to make, Wanda. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. But that's kind of gotten some new life in recent years. The difference is that the films of those women in that era, you know, they were just not much seen for various reasons. And Joan's film Hester Street got out there in a way that theirs didn't. So by the end of the 90s, thereabouts, Joan was regarded as a guiding spirit for the vibrant new women's cinema scene that had emerged by then. She served on the advisory board of the New York Women's Film Festival and was booked as a panelist and expert. She said, "I used to make it my business to go to every film directed by a woman, just as a kind of show of solidarity," she said. "But I could not possibly do that now because they're all over the place. They're making everything from music videos to television films to feature films." She was often sought out for advice by new filmmakers, male and female alike. She was glad to share her wisdom. She said, "Of course, I'm flattered by it. I enjoy meeting with filmmakers and talking to them and comparing notes. They're looking for almost any kind of help they can get that might help them get projects off the ground." More than most, she appreciated the progress women began making in film, again, after being left behind for so long. "Absolutely, it's great," she told me. She attributed this breakthrough as much to women pounding at the gates of opportunity long and hard enough to finally gain entry as to any contribution that she and her peers may have made. Whether due to inroads made by these modern pioneers or not, once closed doors have undeniably opened. And of course, the number of women filmmakers today is exponentially more than what it has been. But women still account for just a tiny fraction of feature filmmakers. So despite all that progress, if you look at it in a holistic way, we're still kind of where we've always been. Yes, more women are getting those opportunities, but it's still a male-dominated industry and will likely remain so for a very long time. Joan and Ray had 3 daughters, and they more or less grew up on their mother's movie sets. They pursued screen careers of their own to one extent or another. Marissa has directed feature films. Dina is a producer. Claudia is a writer-director. Of her daughters following her footsteps, Silver said, "I think they all felt at home with the process, and I don't think they had an unrealistically rosy view of it at all. They've certainly been aware of the various things I've gone through, but they've seen for the most part that I've enjoyed it and am proud of what I've achieved and am still at it, and so on. So I hope they've been encouraged by it." Joan was excited by the prospect of a more dynamic cinema emerging from the new talent pool of women and minority filmmakers. "It's going to be a much richer stew," she said, "and something all of us can enjoy. Women are definitely in a better place today. Talented women do get opportunities. It's not nearly as bleak as it once was." She told me this in 2011. And that was the year, by the way, that Catherine Bigelow became the first woman to win a Best Director Oscar for The Hurt Locker. Though grateful for the progress, the realist in her knew there was more work to be done. And so, just as an example, and there were some, I think I have some numbers that are in my story about the, oh, by the way, I meant to say, or refer to this earlier, this is a still from the cast and crew rehearsing that play with music, Hester Street, that made its world premiere in Washington, D.C. I have not checked. I also write a lot about theater. I haven't checked lately with any Omaha theater companies to see if there are any plans to bring Hester Street, the play, to Joan's hometown of Omaha. As a programmer, it would be like perfect to have a double feature of Hester Street and Crossing Delancey the same weekend as you have the play performed. But that may be rather unrealistic. But I think I have some numbers in the article that refer again to the tiny fraction of women who are still getting opportunities to particularly direct feature films. But there are also references in the story to the fact that Joan, at a certain point in her career, maybe by the time she reached her late 60s, early 70s, was viewed as this mentor figure for other women, as a figure of inspiration for other women to pursue their filmmaking dreams. She has been referenced in many articles and in programs. So the playwright who adapted Joan's film Hester Street into the play actually got to meet Joan and discuss her play project with Joan. So Joan was part of that process, actually, before she got ill and could no longer participate. She didn't live to see it fulfilled on stage, but her family and her husband Ray had preceded her in death. And so, but her family, her daughters and their families got to attend the premiere of Hester Street in Washington, D.C. And it was quite an occasion for them. And that playwright who got to know Joan a bit and share her ideas for adapting Hester Street, the movie, to Hester Street, the play, she had conversations with Joan about some of the struggles that she faced in trying to pursue this filmmaking career. She said it never got easy. She really stressed that when I met her. It was always a battle. In so many ways, I'm incredibly fortunate to be the beneficiary of the work and struggles of Joan and her generation of artists. So here's an example of still how disproportionate things are. The Center for the Study of Women in Television and Film Studies at San Diego State University found that in 2022, women accounted for only 22% of television and film directors. So it might be easy, now we see women directors' names attached to a lot of projects these days as producers, directors, writers. And so it might be easy to assume, everything is wonderful. They're just getting all these opportunities. Well, they're definitely getting more opportunities, but it still pales in comparison to what's available for their male counterparts. And the numbers are basically the same for women writers, producers, and executive producers as they are for directors. And 30% of editors are women, but only 8% are cinematographers. And that's important to note because those are sometimes entryways from someone to go from being an editor or a cinematographer to being a director. So if you're not getting the first opportunity, then the second opportunity is not likely to come to you. And I guess there has been this progress made, but if there is to be like a real sea change to happen, it will only happen when women are at the reins of power, right, at the studios, and can call those shots for other women and give those opportunities directly to other women. And so we'll just have to see how this plays out. One example of how know, of the disparity. So you have two native Nebraska filmmakers of some renown, Alexander Payne and Joan Micklin Silver, but the first name, Alexander Payne, is more or less a household name, at least in Nebraska and maybe other parts of America, because of the scale of his movies, the attention they get, etc. And yet, as we proved here today, Joan Micklin Silver is a name that simply doesn't resonate with many people. And by the way, Payne was an admirer of her work. They met. He tried to induce her to come to Omaha for a tribute at Film Streams in her honor. And just as she had, turned me down decades before, she did the same with him, much to his chagrin. I didn't check this, but I believe that Joan was honored at the Ross in Lincoln once. Whether she was there for that, I'm not entirely sure. We'd have to check with Danny Lee Laidley, the now retired longtime director of the Ross, to find that out. I believe that Joan's biggest commercial success was Crossing Delancey. If you go online, you can see that its box office numbers were about $16 million. For a 1988 small comedy, that's pretty good. I don't know what the film's budget was. I'm guessing it would have been just a fraction of that $16 million. And that was a film that found, I think, a crossover audience that some of her other films just never found. I referred to Ira Deutschman, the film producer, educator, who had actually worked with Joan and Ray on helping distribute Hester Street, and how depressed he was when he found out that her work was so little known by his own students. He said, "I was astounded in my teaching by how few of my students had ever heard of Joan Micklin Silver. Part of it was the films were out of circulation or buried somewhere where nobody was checking them out." And, thanks to Mr. Deutschman, that has changed. But that change, I'm still waiting for that change to catch up with her own home state of Nebraska and her own hometown of Omaha. And back to the playwright who was inspired to adapt Hester Street. So that film had a big impact on her, and she knew for a long time that she wanted to adapt it, and Joan gave her that permission and her blessing. And even though, as I said, Joan didn't live to see the finished play, by all reports she was very happy with what was being done with her baby, as she referred to it. So Joan's daughter, Dina Silver, told me this. Before my mother's health failed, she had begun to work on Hester Street, the play, and she would be deeply moved and exhilarated to see that the project came to life even after her death. We are excited that Mom's gorgeous commitment to stories that touch the heart has a new life in the play. And Dina said that when she sees women-crafted movies, TV shows, whatever the case may be, she hopes that some of their makers acknowledge her mother's pathfinding contributions. Referring to her mother, she would be absolutely thrilled to see the numbers of women putting their individual stamp of heart and intellect on films all over the world, and to have been one of the women who helped nudge the door open. Not one to dwell much on what might have been, Joan felt that an even playing field might have meant more chances, but considered her career a validation of women's gains. Well, one always feels one could have done more, she said, but I've managed to make films for many years now in a field that was extremely unfriendly to women and to make the films I wanted. And at the end of the day, that's about all one can hope for, right? And wish for in a career, in a life. And I never got the sense that she was bitter or anything like that. I mean, the obstacles she faced were the obstacles she faced. She was a realist about it. And she simply just kept moving forward, and doing her work. As you can tell, I'm a great champion of her and her work, and I'm hoping that, I've planted seeds here so that you can, seek her work out yourselves, and maybe you can help pass along some of that enthusiasm, assuming that you will be enthusiastic about what you see, and I'm confident you will, because, she wasn't one that thought, I think, a lot about legacy, but I know that she, as her own words indicate, she was very proud of what she achieved, and she was never one to boast. She was very humble, and I hope to just do a small part in my own way just to kind of enhance that legacy. So, I think that's all I have.
I'd like to do that as yes. Birthday talk. He's recent. Well, I googled. Is this on? Is it on? Spell down. That's what they need. I'll talk in my teacher voice. It says here that Joan received the award from the Ross 2011. I'm one of those that luckily I came to a meeting yesterday here at the museum and learned about this brown bag lunch, and I went, boo, what is that?
Sure.
Didn't I? And so it's just so interesting listening to you, and I think now about now there's when she was in school, there was not a separate college for those individuals, I don't believe, that wanted to go into filmmaking. And now I think of the University of Nebraska that has that college, and all these kids that want to do what she's doing and don't anticipate the struggle, which I think artists do not anticipate the struggle. So I thought this was I wrote down all the films that you've mentioned and we'll watch them. I just thought it was really interesting learning from you today.
Well, thanks. And you make a point about film studies programs. There were no such things until well into the 1960s, anywhere in America. Alexander Payne has a project in progress, a short documentary on the noted film historian Janine Basinger, a name that, again, I'm sure most of you are not familiar with, but some of you may have one of her books, the It's a Wonderful Life book she's the author of. So she is about as respected a film historian as you can find in the world. She lives in South Dakota in retirement today. Why? Because she's from South Dakota originally, but she taught at Wesleyan University for 60 years. And she basically talked them into letting her start a film studies program. And because there were almost none anywhere at that time, I have to assume she was also the first woman to head a film studies program, and it became world renowned. And then she wrote book after book, article after article. But I just discovered for myself that Payne has been working on this project for a couple of years, and he's, of course, interviewed her, and he's going to be interviewing lots of very famous people who have very warm things to say about Janine. Joan Micklin Silver, you make a great point. She came up at a time when there wasn't much help or support, not much infrastructure, academically, professionally, or otherwise. And so she had to make her own way. And I don't think I ever asked her, but I would have been interested to know if she befriended or she got befriended by any of the women filmmakers who had preceded her. So did she have any kind of contact with Ida Lupino, with Elaine May, with Barbara Loden, Shirley Clark? Somehow I neglected to ask her that.
I just want to also say that, whether or not there was a film studies college, it's still a struggle. And, these kids have really want to go that direction. I know this sounds really weird, but I'm a textiles person, and that's where my area is. But I'm glad I have a teaching certificate, because you really also need to fall back on something to make worthy and then do what you really love in early morning after you work.
I know of what you speak, but you're talking to an insane person who has no teaching certificate and has tried to make a living full-time as a writer only for 40 years.
Literally.
And sometimes it's been more than a little difficult. But in addition to writing articles for various media platforms, more recently I've begun writing these nonfiction books, and they're commission projects. And so when I get them, I'm in my glory and they pay all my bills, but getting them can't be taken for granted. They've all the book projects have come to me when the subject/client approached another writer, and the writer said, no, I don't really do that thing, but there's this guy I know, Leo Biga, you should check with him. That's how they've come to me. So it's not a safe way to try to make a living, but I don't know how to do anything else.
Any other question?
You're all going to rush out and try to find the nearest streaming service to watch Joan Micklin Silverman.
Please. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Biga, for coming and speaking.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anyway, thank you all for joining us here at the Nebraska History Museum. I encourage you to come back again next month, April 15th. Authors Dennis and Laura Crawford will be talking about their recently published book, Robert F. Kennedy, The Road Not Taken, about the 1968 Democratic primary in Nebraska that brought so much attention and brought extensive campaigning of RFK here in the state. So we hope to see you next month. Thank you so much.